Hello everyone, this is a video tutorial on how to build a terrarium. Now the terrarium that we are building here is an enclosure for a green tree python. So for the first step, what we're going to start with is we are going to start building the background. So now what we're going to do is we've got some pieces of cork bark at like a plant store. So we got a couple of nice pieces of cork bark. What we're going to do is we're going to adhere them to the back. So we kind of have an arrangement that we think looks nice. Something like so. So now what we got to do is use some black silicone and seal them down. So a few notes on the setup here is I'm putting my hand through the top of the cage, and the bottom of the cage is actually on the left side. So you'll notice that there's about a 5 or 6 inch gap beneath the cork bark, and that is there for a reason, because we are going to have to put a drainage layer and a substrate layer for the plants to grow. Then the next piece. So in this step, we're attaching the cork bark to the back of the terrarium enclosure. Then the next step is we are going to use great stuff foam to create some texture, fill in any gaps, and then once the great stuff foam sets up, we're going to put ground coconut husk or coir over the great stuff foam, and we're going to adhere it using black silicone. So that's what we are going to be doing in the next step or two. Alright, so now that we have those plopped down with some silicone on the back, we'll give it a day, and then we'll come back and put on the great stuff foam. Now that we've given the silicone a day to dry, what we're going to do is we're going to use great stuff expanding foam, and we're just going to fill in all the gaps and cracks and make sure it looks okay. You can use the regular great stuff foam, but we opted to go with the Pond and Stone because it's black. If the color of the other one bothers you, go with this. So then what we're going to do is just fill it in. We're going to leave this top bit open on each of these cork barks because there's enough space underneath that we could probably squeeze a plant in here. So we'll put a couple of plants in here and just use black silicone to fill that in. So now that the great stuff foam has been allowed to dry, we carved out a little section for the radiant heat panel that's going to go on the top because it wouldn't fit with the foam just as is. Trimmed up any portions that were hanging over. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take that same black silicone too, and we're just going to cover all the great stuff foam in it and then cover it in coconut husk. So let's just get it going. Now you may be asking yourself, what is a radiant heat panel? And what it is just a heat source for the snake that we plan to keep in this enclosure. So you probably won't need one unless you're thinking of keeping a green tree python in your terrarium. There, it's out.
Just in the nick of time.
Alright, now spread it around, get it all over everything.
That's what she said.
And then once we're done spreading around the silicon, what we're going to do is we're going to take coir, or ground coconut husk, and we're going to press it into the silicon. Now, I'll show a little bit later more about coir and what it is and how to use it. Okay. Alright, now we're going to just pour the coconut husk on top and just smear it around. Make sure we get everything covered. And then press firmly on everything. All right, and then another note about this ground coconut husk is that we bought the brick kind, the Zoomed Eco Earth, and we just took one of the bricks, hydrated it, then we stuck all the junk that comes off that brick into the oven for about 2 days at 250 degrees, let it completely dry out so it'll stick as best as possible on the silicon. Alright, and we will leave that for about a day or two, then we'll tip it upright and let all the excess spill off. Now that we got the thing tipped up, what we're going to do is we're going to clean up the edges with a razor blade. So I'm just going to take from here and just So now that we have the thing tipped up and we've cleaned up the edges a bit, there's going to be a place or two where the coir and silicon didn't exactly stick. So what we're doing in this step is we're taking one of those places, putting black silicon on it, and then putting sphagnum moss in the silicon. That'll give us a little more texture. So just plop a little blob in the silicon, press it in. Then we'll do the same with another blob. The key here is really not to fret too much about what it's going to look like, just plop it in there. Now let's talk about what we're going to be putting in for the substrate. The first and bottom layer is the drainage layer. Now we are going to be using pebbles for this, which we got at Home Depot, and they're very cheap, so that's the benefit there. If you're worried about weight, you can use something like expanded clay pellets or smashed terracotta pots. Then that will need to be 1 to 2 inches deep, and the purpose of this layer is so that if and when you overwater, which is an inevitability, that the water has somewhere to go other than sitting at the bottom of the terrarium and getting the roots of your plant soggy, because that would kill your plants. So 1 to 2 inches for that layer. Then on top of that, there is going to be a layer of activated charcoal. Now the purpose of the activated charcoal is to absorb smells mostly. So that'll keep your terrarium smelling nice, won't let really nasty things accumulate in the bottom. Then on top of that, there will be a permeable barrier layer. What we are using is the air filter for a central heating system. It's made of kind of like a fiberglass-like material. And this is nice because it doesn't decompose, it's cheap, and it's easy to cut to scale. Now you can also use fiberglass screen, anything that is permeable that will not decompose. Then on top of that permeable barrier layer, you'll need at least 4 inches of our soil mix that actually contains no real soil. We'll get to the constituents of that later. Alright, now that we've got the cage where we want it to stay, we're going to start loading it with substrate. So the first thing that's going to go in is our gravel. This is just a drainage layer. It could be expanded clay pellets. We're using pond, like river pebbles. We're using them because they're smooth. Smooth pebbles will hopefully have less bacteria growing in and around them than the coarse ones. So this first layer we are going to make 1 inch. Next we're going to put charcoal. This is like an activated charcoal for the use in terrariums. We'll be using a 1/2 inch layer of the activated charcoal. Alright, that should be good for the charcoal layer. Next we're going to put in one of the fiberglass air filters, or like the plasticky air filters that you get at like Home Depot. We cut it to fit, and we're just going to sit it on top, and that'll prevent any other layers from getting up into our drainage layer. Then in this case, we are going to be using a little ABS fitting for the water dishes we plan to put in here. Then at this point, we'll put the rest of the substrate. So the constituents for the next part of the substrate that you're going to want to use consist of 1 part coir, or ground coconut husk. In this case, we are using ZoomEd's Eco Earth. You just shove it in a bucket full of water and it'll expand. Next part is 1 part sphagnum moss. This is a bit of sphagnum moss that we had left over from another project. Now you can get that at like Lowe's or Home Depot. Here is a bag of cactus soil. Now when I was at the nursery, the lady suggested I add a little something extra just to spice things up, so I got a bag of this. You probably don't actually need it. Then we're going to do 2 parts orchid bark. In this case we got a natural orchid bark. That's pretty important when you have reptiles. You want to make sure that it's either organic or something meant for reptiles, especially if you have amphibians, because sometimes they have fertilizers in them. Another option you may want to consider is something like this repti bark, which is just 100% pure fur bark, which is meant for reptiles. So we need 2 parts of the orchid bark, and also 2 parts of this leaf compost. Now the leaf compost is basically just leaves that you're going to pick up off the ground, and here in a moment we'll actually cut to a video where I'll show where I got mine. So now we're going to show you a little bit about the leaf litter. So basically what we've done is we've gone to a little willow forest that's near our place. And all these leaves here on the ground are pretty much all willow leaves. So we're just going to grab handfuls of them. And you want to avoid getting the dirt beneath them. So just like grab handfuls of leaves and avoid the sticks. We'll end up with stuff that looks like this. And that's exactly what we're looking for. So I'll show you a little slide right here that'll show what trees to get. So here's the list of trees and bushes that you can use to get your leaf litter. It includes ash, birch, cherry, cottonwood, crabapple, elm, hickory, oak, pear, poplar, willow, the boxwood bush, and the privet bush. Now the reason for leaf litter is it gives you something organic that can decompose to feed your plants, But these varieties of leaves decompose relatively slowly, so that is a bonus. So it's almost like a time-release fertilizer. Now, another thing that the composting leaf litter does is it introduces biological activity. That's why you want to go out and get it from beneath a tree out in nature somewhere, because that's going to add some healthy biological activity to the terrarium. So now let's go over the recipe of this part of the substrate. So it is 1 part coir, or the ground coconut husk, which you can buy in either bricks or loose in a bag. There is 1 part sphagnum moss, which you can buy at any home improvement store that sells plants, or any nursery. 2 parts orchid bark, which can easily be ordered online or found at any nursery. You'll want the organic variety or something that is specific to reptiles if you're planning to put any animals in the terrarium. Now, what orchid bark is it's just a substrate that people use to grow orchids, which consists of the bark of trees, which generally is probably most likely Douglas fir. So 100% pure Douglas fir bark is going to be a great option for your orchid bark. And you'll need 2 parts composting leaves, or the leaf litter that we collected in the willow forest. Now, you can get this with any of the trees that we just saw. Another thing is, if you are not planning on doing reptiles, you could probably add just a little bit of fertilizer, but take the minimum amount that you think you can put in and divide it in half. Don't overdo it on the fertilizer in a terrarium. In fact, later on with the terrarium, you will not need to add any fertilizer, because by adding extra fertilizer, you're just going to get more growth. You're going to need to prune more aggressively, and it's probably going to look a little scrappy with fertilizer. So easy on the fertilizer, if you decide to do any at all. So now let's start to mix this stuff up. And when we start to mix it, you may need to add water to get the consistency needed.
All you need to do is pull up a handful, talk about the consistency that you're feeling and maybe even the smell. Give them an idea of what they should be looking at.
Let's get one without so many sticks. There we go. Okay, so this is the consistency we're looking at. It feels moist and airy, but has a good, like, almost spongy texture. It bounces back when you squeeze it just a little bit. It does compact, but not a lot, so there's still going to be room for roots to grow. And this will absorb a lot of water before it lets anything go to the drainage layer, but it's going to remain airy. So just a quick reminder of what we have so far. We have 1.5 inches of gravel, then about 1/2 inch of charcoal on top of that, then the air filter that we cut out to keep the drainage layer and the substrate layer separated, and then for the next 4 inches we are going to do soil, which is the substrate mix we just made up.
Yeah, you're almost empty. Just dump it all.
Okay, let's dump it all.
There we go.
Okay. So we had a little area that we had designated with the ABS pipe and a little plastic deli cup that was for watering the snake that could be put in and out of this cage. So we just left the cup intact, and then we'll put the substrate layer in. Just kind of pushing it gently, but not like hard, into place. Spreading it around so it gets even. And then we left the cup in so that once we got all the substrate put in, we just take the cup out. And fill in. Alright, now we got this bad boy planted, so I'll show you what we put in here. So down here is red selaginella, which is related to golden moss. Then this is a variegated African violet. Down here is an all-green spider plant. This is parlor palm. This is Fittonia or nerve plant. And then this is creeping fig, which is a member of the ficus family. I think it's also known as Ficus repens. So this will climb the cork bark and cover the back. This will probably get just a touch higher, but we can keep it nice and to size by pruning it. This should hopefully get a little bit bigger. The African violet, I suspect, will not get too much bigger. The spider plant will get quite a bit bigger, but with pruning, we can keep it down to size. And then the red selaginella will keep in check by pruning. So that's kind of what we got going on. Also, I got some stones from the local river. Just kind of went hiking up there, grabbed a few, brought them home. So that's the deal there. And that's the plant selection we got. So here's a closer look at some of the plants. This here is the African violet, variegated, so that means it has the white on the edges of the leaves. The red selaginella, we've pruned it in this area quite a bit to keep it to the size we want. And we'll let it grow in, see what happens. Here's the all-green spider plant. Got some moss that we collected from the local river, just kind of sit it in there. It's probably going to be a temporary deal. The parlor palm. And then the rocks with the moss that was just on them when I picked them up. The Fittonia or nerve plant. This one is actually flowering a little bit. So that's the Fittonia. And then this is the creeping fig. So that'll grow and hopefully cover up the whole back. So the creeping fig, if you have herbivores, you probably best avoid. The nerve plant, the Fittonia, is non-toxic, as is African violet and spider plant. Not sure about the parlor palm, but since this is just going to be with a green tree, it's not like the green tree is going to be ingesting any of these. So, and then the red selaginella, not so sure about. But if you're going to have like herbivores, then just double check, make sure that the plants you put in are non-toxic. Alright, so we decided to go with a custom light fixture that we made ourselves. It has two GX23-2 fittings in it with two 26-watt bulbs for a total of 52 watts of compact fluorescent. We wanted something that gave a lot of light in a really compact package, and this delivers that. This ABS pipe that we used to contain the lights is 3.5 inches wide, which we wanted because the heat panel is going to occupy this region and further back. So we needed something nice and thin that we could put near the front of the cage. I would recommend that you go with a fixture that is actually designed for your cage if you don't have additional needs like a heat panel. But if you do need like a heat panel or some other device on the top that's going to take up the real estate for the light, creating your own could be a viable option. I'm sure you can find videos elsewhere on YouTube that'll help you do that. Now, a lot can be said for lighting in a terrarium, but I'm going to keep it as brief as possible. Now, for this terrarium, it is 18 inches wide, 18 inches deep, and 2 feet high, and we are using 52 watts of compact fluorescent light. Now, the color temperature of the light we are using is 5500 K, and all that means is that it's going to look a little bit more blue. Now, truth be told, the color temperature isn't really going to matter. Plants use light in the visible spectrum, so as long as you give them sufficient light, they should be happy. Now, my recommendation as far as wattage is to make sure you try to get 20 watts per foot of length in your terrarium. Now, this is going to be watts of either fluorescent or compact fluorescent, not incandescent light. That's because, say you had an old 100-watt incandescent bulb, it only takes 26 watts of fluorescent power to a fluorescent bulb to produce the same amount of light. So make sure you're looking at the true wattage of the bulb, not the incandescent equivalent. So this is the terrarium 2 months after it was planted. I'll show you a little bit about what's been going on. So the creeping fig, the ficus here, went from about yay high to yay high, and these guys are adhered on there pretty well. So it's doing really well, sticking to the back. Parlor palm, I don't know if it's grown much, but it's been pretty consistent, so no complaints about that. Spider plants got some good rooting going on. The African violet, when we first put it in, it had a lot of flowers because we just got it from the nursery. And then once we planted it, the flowers started to get a little wilty, so we cut the flowers completely off, let it root a little bit. 2 months later, flowers are back. They're coming in strong. There's plenty that haven't even begun to bloom that are coming through, so that's pretty healthy. The Fittonia is doing really well. It's grown up a bit and out maybe just a touch. The thing that has not done well is the red Selaginella. It was, even though this is a really humid, warm environment, it was just drying out, so it died. We would probably choose a plant that doesn't have to be kept so wet for next time. So this will get taken out eventually. The other thing that we've done is I have taken some of the creeping fig that was growing out and towards the front of the terrarium, cut it off and planted it towards the back on the right side. So I'll show you that now.
Let's try going up and over.
So planted a little bit down in there. The moss has actually done surprisingly well. It's growing very well. The stuff that was on the ground, that didn't do so hot, so I removed it. But we came in knowing that was going to be temporary, and frankly, I thought even the stuff on the rocks would be completely dead by now, but it seems to be doing okay. So we'll go through spider plant, African violet, show you the red Selaginella that didn't do so hot. And the Fittonia. And the creeping fig. This concludes the video on how to build a terrarium. Have fun!